The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, Lord. When the time arrived for Elizabeth to have her child, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy toward her, and they rejoiced with her. When they came on the 8th day to circumcise the child, they were going to call him Zechariah after his father. But his mother said in reply, "No, he will be called John." But they answered her, "There is no one among your relatives who has this name." So they made signs asking his father what he wished him to be called. Zechariah asked for a tablet and wrote, "John is his name," and they were all amazed. Immediately his mouth was opened, his tongue freed, and he spoke, blessing God. Then fear came upon all the neighbors, and all these matters were discussed throughout the hill country of Judea. All who heard these things took them to heart, saying, "What then will this child be? For surely the hand of the Lord was upon him." The child grew and became strong in spirit, and he was in the desert until the day of his manifestation to Israel. The Gospel of the Lord. Today's solemnity of the birth of St. John the Baptist is important because it reminds us broadly of our own salvation history. We all have a personal salvation history from the time, let's say, of our birth and then our baptism, and then as we grow in faith. I hope you can look back even now as you've been to various book studies and you've gone to Mass through the course of your life in one form or way or another, and different people have come and gone in your life. You've read different books, and what's the story of your salvation? What persons, times, places, or encounters can you name that really alerted you to the living relationship you have with God now? I don't suspect it's because you loved catechism so much, or that you learned, good that we did, but the salvation history that in some way opened your mind, but more importantly, your heart. There's a set of 3 readings now, as you know, that really points out the broader picture of the role of John the Baptist. Again, we're familiar that John is the last of the Old Testament prophets. He is that bridge from the old to the new. He is that proclaimer, that ultimate prophet of the Lord that prepares the way of the Lord. So we hear from Isaiah, as we would typically hear, likely in the time of Advent. The reading could refer, and probably does, refer to Jesus, but it's equally effective for John the Baptist. For the Lord called him, not unlike many of the other prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah in particular. The Lord called him from birth, from his mother's womb. He gave him his name, etc. What did it mean, or what did it take for John to be John the Baptist? John accepted, and John acted on his call. He took it to heart. Obviously, Elizabeth and Zechariah formed him in that household of faith, Zechariah of the priestly class, doing his ministrations at the temple. He rejoices now when his tongue is loosed after he had doubted. 6 months later, he had doubted, well, how is this going to be? But now his tongue is loosed because John has been named God is gracious. John is God's gracious gift who announces the gift of our salvation. They're common words. We kind of know the story, but think about that today. Some part of John the Baptist, realistically and quite honestly, is in all of us. We don't think of it, But these stories and accounts of the Old Testament, in some ways, they're all a part of us. They're part of the fabric of our spiritual being. How many times have you heard the poems, the hymns, and the prose of Isaiah, and the stories and the accounts of Jeremiah? Somehow they inform and form our faith. What part of John is in you as you prepare the way of the Lord for others, you see, particularly now in this age and time of evangelization? People you meet who may or may not ask you about Jesus, or are you Catholic? Are you Christian? Do you go to church? Do you believe in God? However people might engage you, maybe there are people in your own house, family or friends, strangers or neighbors. How do you help prepare the way of the Lord so that others might come to know the Lord, not like you know the Lord, but you say or do something that awakens them? That was the role of John. Jesus deserved to have the way prepared for him. He had a hard enough task. But again, historically, the people of Israel for generations were longing for a Messiah, for the Christ, the Anointed One, to come. Only appropriate that God would bless us with the gift of John so that when the Messiah at last came, those with eyes of faith could see and ears to hear could hear and receive. Ponder the gift of John today. How might John be in you? What did it take for John to be the Baptist? Prayer, fasting, quiet and solitude in the desert. Not many of us would embrace that kind of lifestyle, but for John it fit his call and he embraced it deeply. You know, there's a gap in the reading, in the verses we read today. About 15 verses are skipped, and all of a sudden John's, I'm going to guess, a late teenager, maybe 20 years old. The child grew and became strong in spirit, and he was in the desert. I don't think they put John in the desert right after they took him out of diapers. They had to raise him first. But let's say 18 or 20, he went to the desert. And maybe what? He was there 6 months, a year. How long did he stay in the desert? He was a young man when he was beheaded, but he was ready. And he prepared himself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically, and physically. He knew, perhaps not unlike Jesus, what would come. Notice the placement of where this solemnity sits. We're literally at the summer solstice, so that now, sorry to say, the days are going to be getting shorter. But notice 6 months later, when Jesus is born in late December, the days will be coming longer. John says, I must decrease, he must increase. Jesus is the light of the world. At Christmas, there's more light. He is the light of the world that has now come to shine upon us the light of glory. Consider again John the Baptist today. How are you a preparer of the Lord for others? May the grace that was upon John in some way bless us as we give honor to God today for the gift of John the Baptist, the greatest and last of all the prophets.